God forgave Nineveh, the most brutal city in the ancient world, the Assyrians who flayed prisoners alive and stacked human heads in pyramids at the gates of the cities they conquered. God sent a prophet, Jonah, to give them a chance, and when they repented, God forgave them. Jonah chapter 3 verse 10. God forgave Egypt, the empire that enslaved his people for 430 years. The ones who drowned Hebrew babies in the Nile, the ones who ground them down with forced labor under the desert sun until their bodies broke. And yet, God did not order the total destruction of Egypt. He punished Pharaoh, freed his people, and the Egyptian nation continued to exist. God forgave Babylon, the empire that burned Solomon's temple to the ground. The ones who dragged the people of Judah in chains across 700 kilometers of desert into exile. The ones who melted down the sacred vessels of the temple and used them for their pagan banquets. Daniel chapter 5. And even so, God worked within Babylon. He placed Daniel as prime minister. He made Nebuchadnezzar acknowledge his sovereignty. Daniel chapter 4, verse 37. God forgave Moab. He forgave Edom. He forgave the Philistines. He forgave Syria. He punished all of these nations, yes. He sent judgments upon them, yes. But to none of them did he say what he said to one single nation in the entire Bible. To one single nation, the Amalekites, Exodus chapter 17, verse 14. God says to Moses, I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Blot out, utterly, the memory from under heaven. Those words do not appear for any other people in all of Scripture, not for Assyria, not for Babylon, not for Egypt, not for Rome, only for Amalek. And then, as if once were not enough, God repeats it in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 17 through 19. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you came out of Egypt. You shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. Remember, blot out, do not forget. 3 commands in 3 verses about one single nation. And here is the question that very few people dare to ask, the question that should make you uncomfortable, the question that, if you are honest, you are probably already asking yourself, why? What did the Amalekites do that was so different from what the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, and all the others did? What was so grave, so deep, so irreparable, that the God who defines himself as slow to anger and abounding in mercy declared an eternal war against them? Because notice something, God did not say, I am going to punish Amalek. He did not say, I am going to send a judgment upon Amalek. He said, I am going to blot out his memory from under heaven. It is not punishment, it is total elimination. It is the difference between putting someone in prison and erasing every trace that that person ever existed. And that is exactly what we are going to investigate today, step by step, layer by layer, Hebrew word by Hebrew word. Because the answer to this question is not on the surface of the text. It is buried in the original language. It is hidden in details that most English translations overlook. And when you discover it, it is going to completely change the way you understand the justice of God. Let us start from the beginning. Israel had just come out of Egypt. They had just crossed the Red Sea. They had just witnessed the 10 plagues. They had seen the water turn to blood, darkness cover the land for 3 days, and the angel of death pass over Egypt, taking the firstborn of every family. They had seen the most powerful army in the world drown in the sea while they passed through on dry ground. And here, I need you to understand something crucial about the geopolitical context of that moment. Because what had just happened was not merely a religious event, it was a political event of seismic proportions. All the nations of the ancient world had heard about what had happened. Exodus chapter 15, verses 14 through 16, describes it clearly. The peoples of Philistia trembled. The chiefs of Edom were dismayed. The mighty men of Moab were seized with trembling. All the inhabitants of Canaan melted away in fear. Rahab, The woman of Jericho confirms it 40 years later in Joshua chapter 2, verses 9 through 11. I know that the Lord has given you the land, for the fear of you has fallen upon us, and all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no courage left in any man because of you. Do you understand what that means? After the Exodus, Israel was untouchable. No nation in its right mind would attack the people whose God had just humiliated the most powerful empire on earth. It was as if Israel walked surrounded by a shield of sacred terror. No one dared touch them. No one. Except one. Exodus chapter 17, verse 8. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim, without provocation, without territory in dispute, without a threatened resource, without a declaration of war, without ambassadors, without an ultimatum. Amalek came and fought with Israel, and I need you to understand the strategic madness of this decision. They had just seen how the God of this people destroyed the most powerful army on the planet. They had just heard how the waters closed over 600 Egyptian war chariots, and not a single one survived. And Amalek looked at all of that and said, I am going to attack them. It is like someone watching a nuclear explosion and deciding to walk toward the center of the radiation. It makes no military sense. It makes no strategic sense. It makes no sense of any kind. Unless the motive is not military or strategic. Unless the motive is something else entirely. But Amalek did not fight the way a normal army would. They did not stand face to face against the forces of Israel in a conventional battle. What they did was far worse. And to understand it, we need to jump to Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 17 and 18, where Moses describes exactly how that attack unfolded. And this is where the original Hebrew reveals something that English translations simply do not capture. But first, let me tell you what happened during the battle itself, because it has a symbolism that connects directly with what we are about to discover. Exodus chapter 17, verses 9 through 13. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose men for us, and go out and fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." And Joshua fought. But something extraordinary happened. Verses 11 and 12. When Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. But when he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. And Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him. And he sat on it, and Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and one on the other side, so his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. Do you understand what the text is saying? The victory over Amalek did not depend on the strength of the army. It depended on the raised hands of Moses. When the hands went up, Israel won. When the hands went down, Amalek won. It was not a conventional battle decided by numbers or strategy. It was a spiritual battle decided by the people's connection with God. And Moses could not keep his hands up alone. He needed Aaron and Hur, one on each side, holding him up. Because the battle against Amalek is not fought in solitude. It is fought in community. It is fought with others who hold you up when your strength runs out. And after the victory, God says to Moses something he did not say after any other battle in the entire Exodus. Verse 14. "Write this as a memorial in a book, and tell Joshua that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." Write, as a memorial, in a book. It is the only case in the entire Exodus where God commands that an event be written down specifically so it will not be forgotten. And Moses built an altar and called it Jehovah Nissi, which means "the Lord is my banner." And he said, verse 16, "The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation, from generation to generation. It is not a one-time punishment. It is a continuous war, a war that transcends eras, a war that does not end with a single battle or a peace treaty. God declared an eternal war against this people, against no other, only against Amalek. The text says, "Remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you came out of Egypt." And then comes the key word, the first Hebrew word you need to know today. Asher Karchah Baderek. Karchah. This word appears only once in the entire Bible, in this military context. And it has at least 3 levels of meaning that the rabbis have debated for centuries. The first level is the most obvious. Karchah comes from the root kara, which means to encounter by chance or to happen upon. It is a surprise attack. There was no formal declaration of war. There were no ambassadors, no ultimatums, no negotiations. Amalek simply appeared, without warning, without apparent reason. But the second level is the one that changes everything. The sages of the Talmud connect Karchah with the root kar, which in Hebrew means cold, to cool off. And this is where the image becomes devastating. Imagine a bathtub of boiling water, so hot that no living creature can get in. That was Israel after the Exodus. After the 10 plagues, after the parting of the sea, Israel was surrounded by an aura of sacred terror, boiling, untouchable. No nation dared. And then Amalek came and jumped into the boiling tub. Yes, he got burned. Yes, he lost the battle of Rephidim, but in doing so he cooled the water for everyone else. By attacking Israel and showing that they could be attacked, Amalek told the entire world, they are not invincible. You can fight them. Their God does not protect them from everything. Amalek did not attack Israel to conquer territory. He attacked Israel to destroy the fear that the nations had of God. Do you understand the difference? Egypt wanted slave labor. Babylon wanted to expand its empire. Assyria wanted to collect tribute from the nations. Philistia wanted control of the coast. Every enemy of Israel had an understandable human motive, a political motive, an economic motive, a territorial motive. Amalek had none of those motives. Amalek attacked to defy God, and that puts him in a completely different category from any other enemy. But there is still a third level of Karchah that is even more disturbing. Some rabbis connect the root with keri, which appears in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 11, and refers to nocturnal impurity. The idea is that Amalek defiled Israel. He did not just attack them, he contaminated them. He stained the image of holiness that Israel projected before the nations. 3 levels. Surprise, cooling, defilement, all 3 in a single Hebrew word. And the English translations simply say, he met you on the way. Now comes the second revelation from the Hebrew text, and this one is perhaps the most painful. Vayazanev becha kol hanechashalim acharika. And he cut off your tail, all the stragglers behind you. The word is zanav. It literally means tail. To cut the tail, to attack from behind. And that image is not accidental. Who were the stragglers? Who was at the end of the marching column of a people of 2 million walking through the desert? The elderly, the sick, pregnant women, children, the weak, those who could not keep up the pace. Amalek did not attack the army of Israel. He did not face the warriors. He did not seek out Joshua or the men of war. Amalek circled around to the rear and attacked those who could not defend themselves. Imagine that. Imagine a column of people walking through the desert after 430 years of slavery. Entire families, grandparents who can barely walk, mothers carrying babies, small children who get tired and fall behind. And suddenly, from the rear, armed warriors appear attacking exactly those people. It was not a battle. It was a hunt of the vulnerable. And the text closes with 5 words that explain everything. Velo yare Elohim. And he did not fear God. That final phrase is the key to everything. It is the reason for everything. It is the difference between Amalek and every other enemy of Israel. The Egyptians, in the end, feared God. After the 10th plague, Pharaoh said, "Get out." The Philistines feared God. When they captured the ark and plagues fell on them, they returned it in terror. 1 Samuel chapter 5. Nineveh feared God. When Jonah preached, they repented from the king down to the last inhabitant. The Babylonians feared God. Nebuchadnezzar, after 7 years eating grass like an animal, lifted his eyes to heaven and acknowledged that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men. Daniel chapter 4. Every enemy nation of Israel at some point acknowledged that there was a higher power. Each one at some point showed at least a glimmer of reverential awe before the divine. Amalek never, and it was not because they did not know. They had heard about Egypt. They had heard about the Red Sea. They knew exactly who the God of Israel was and what he was capable of, and they chose to attack anyway. Not out of ignorance, out of deliberate defiance. If this is helping you understand something you have never seen in the Bible before, I am going to ask you something. Hit the like button on this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because what comes next is even more shocking. Now someone might say, well, other peoples also attacked Israel. The Philistines attacked them many times. The Moabites too. Why is Amalek different? Excellent question. And the answer lies in a pattern that repeats throughout the entire Bible with a consistency that sends chills down your spine. Amalek did not attack once. Amalek attacked again and again and again and again for centuries, and always in the same way, always targeting the weak, always at the worst possible moment. Look at the sequence. First attack, Rephidim, Exodus 17. They had just left Egypt, exhausted, thirsty, without an organized army. Amalek attacks. Second attack. When the spies returned from Canaan with the negative report and the people rebelled, they tried to go up to Canaan on their own without God's approval. Numbers chapter 14, verse 45. The Amalekites and the Canaanites who dwelt in that hill country came down and struck them and beat them back as far as Hormah. Notice, Israel was at its lowest point spiritually. They had just rebelled against God, and there was Amalek, ready to strike when they were most vulnerable. Third attack, during the period of the Judges, Judges chapter 3, verse 13. Amalek allied with King Eglon of Moab to oppress Israel for 18 years. Fourth attack, Judges chapter 6. Amalek allied with the Midianites. And the text describes something devastating in verses 3 through 5. When Israel planted crops, the Midianites and Amalekites and the people of the east came up against them. They would camp against them and destroy the produce of the land as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, neither sheep nor ox nor donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents like a swarm of locusts. Did you catch that? Amalek did not come to conquer. He came to destroy the harvest. He came to starve the people. He did not want the land of Israel. He wanted Israel to be unable to live in their own land. It is the difference between a thief who wants your house and an arsonist who wants to burn your house down so that no one can ever live in it. And this pattern repeated for generations. Amalek appeared every time Israel was vulnerable, every time they were weak, every time they were in crisis, like a predator that smells blood and attacks the wounded. Are you starting to see why God responded differently to this people? This was not an enemy that wanted something Israel had. This was an enemy that wanted Israel to cease to exist, and not for a political or economic reason, but for a spiritual reason, because the very existence of Israel was a testimony that God exists, that God acts, that God keeps his promises. And Amalek wanted to destroy that testimony. And now we arrive at the most famous episode in this entire story, the moment that changed everything, the mistake that generated consequences for centuries, the chapter that everyone knows, but very few understand in its true depth. 1 Samuel chapter 15. Approximately 400 years had passed since the first attack at Rephidim. 400 years of constant enmity, and God decides that it is time to carry out the sentence he had pronounced in Exodus 17. The prophet Samuel appears before King Saul and says to him, verses 2 and 3, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel in opposing them on the way when they came up out of Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." The Hebrew word here is cherem, total destruction, consecration to God through complete elimination. It is the same word used for Jericho in Joshua chapter 6. Everything had to be destroyed. Nothing could be taken as spoil. Everything belonged exclusively to God. And here is a detail you need to understand. Cherem, total destruction, was not the norm in Israel's wars. It was an extreme exception reserved for specific cases where God directly commanded it. Israel fought dozens of wars throughout its history without cherem being applied. Against most enemies, there were different rules. Prisoners could be taken. Spoil could be kept. There were negotiations and peace treaties, but with Amalek, no, cherem total. Saul assembled 210,000 soldiers. He marched against the Amalekites, and he defeated them. 1 Samuel 15, verse 7. Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt. Crushing victory. Mission almost accomplished. Almost. Verse 9. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep and of the oxen, and of the fattened calves and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them. All that was despised and worthless they devoted to destruction. Read that again. They destroyed everything that was despised and worthless. In other words, what was worth nothing, what was useless, the garbage. But the good stuff, the valuable stuff, what was worth keeping, they spared. And they spared King Agag. And notice the psychology behind this disobedience. Saul did not tell God, "I am not going to obey." Saul partially obeyed. He destroyed what cost him nothing to destroy and kept what was convenient for him to keep. It is the most subtle and dangerous form of disobedience, the kind that disguises itself as obedience. When Samuel arrives and asks what happened, Saul tells him, verse 13, "Blessed be you to the Lord. I have carried out the command of the Lord. I have carried out." In his mind, he had done it. He had won the war. He had destroyed most of it. What did it matter to keep a few sheep and a captive king? And then Samuel says one of the most brutal lines in the entire Bible, verse 14. "What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen that I hear?" Imagine that scene. Saul standing before Samuel saying, "I carried out God's command," while behind him you can hear the sheep and cattle that were supposed to be dead. The evidence of his disobedience bleating in the background. Saul tries to justify himself. Verse 15, "They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have devoted to destruction." Notice two things. First, he deflects blame. The people spared, not him, the people. Second, he invents a spiritual justification to sacrifice to the Lord your God. He was going to use the disobedient spoil to make an offering to God, as if God needed them to return what he never asked them to keep. And here comes Samuel's response, verses 22 and 23. The words that defined the destiny of Saul, the destiny of his dynasty, and that would resonate for centuries in the history of Israel. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and presumption is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. To obey is better than to sacrifice. Disobedience is as grave as witchcraft. Stubbornness is like worshipping idols. And in that moment, the kingdom was torn from Saul's hands. Not for losing a battle, not for worshipping pagan gods, not for committing an obvious moral sin, but for half obeying an order that required total obedience. But wait, because the story does not end here, not even close. What follows is what makes this episode one of the most chilling in all of Scripture. Samuel says to Saul, verse 32, "Bring Agag, the king of the Amalekites, here to me." And Agag comes. And the text says something fascinating. Agag came to him cheerfully. Other translations say confidently or with faltering steps. But the idea is that Agag thought the worst had passed, that if Saul had spared him, he was safe, that the bitterness of death was behind him. And then Samuel says, verse 33, "As your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women." And Samuel hacked Agag to pieces before the Lord at Gilgal. The prophet of God, the judge of Israel, the elderly Samuel, took a sword and personally executed the king of Amalek, because Saul had not finished the task, because God's command had to be fulfilled, because the cherem over Amalek allowed no exceptions. And now pay attention, because here comes the connection that most people miss. Agag died that day, but before he died, he had descendants. The line of Agag was not extinguished with him. And that line survived in the shadows for centuries, silent, seemingly insignificant, forgotten by everyone. Until one day, approximately 500 years later, in the Persian Empire, a man rose to a power that no Amalekite had ever held before. His name was Haman. Before we get to Haman, I need to give you a genealogical fact that many people do not know, and that completely changes the perspective. Where did the Amalekites originally come from? Genesis chapter 36, verse 12. Timnah was a concubine of Eliphaz, the son of Esau, and she bore Amalek to Eliphaz. Amalek was the grandson of Esau, the twin brother of Jacob, the one who sold his birthright for a bowl of stew, the one who despised spiritual things. Genesis chapter 25, verse 34, Esau despised his birthright. And notice the direct line. Esau despised the blessing of God. His grandson Amalek attacked the people of God's blessing. The grandfather's attitude became the grandson's war. What began as spiritual indifference in one generation became active hostility against God in the next. That is what the Bible calls generational consequences. It is not a magical curse. It is a spiritual principle. The attitudes we sow in one generation produce actions in the next. Esau despised God. Amalek declared war on God's people. Agag tried to destroy Israel. Haman tried to exterminate every Jew in the world. A straight line from generation to generation. Exactly as God had said in Exodus 17. The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now back to Haman, Esther chapter 3 verse 1. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, descendant of Agag, descendant of the Amalekite king that Saul should have killed but did not. Did you hear that? Saul's disobedience in 1 Samuel 15 generated the greatest threat the Jewish people had faced up to that point, 500 years later, in a completely different empire, thousands of kilometers away. Haman was not just any official. He was the second most powerful man in the Persian Empire, the prime minister of Ahasuerus. And the first thing he did with his power was plan the total extermination of the Jews. Esther chapter 3 verse 8. Listen to the argument Haman uses before the king. There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. They are different. They have their own laws. They do not assimilate. They do not benefit us. It is better that they not exist. That argument, exactly that argument, it has been repeated against the Jews for 3,000 years, by pharaohs, by emperors, by dictators, by presidents. The words change, the language changes. The century changes, but the argument is exactly the same. And Haman did not settle for oppressing the Jews. He did not ask for extra taxes. He did not propose restrictions. He asked for total extermination. Esther chapter 3, verse 13. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day. Destroy, kill, annihilate, 3 verbs, each more final than the last. Young and old, women and children, all of them. In one single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. Everything planned, everything signed with the royal seal, everything irrevocable under Persian law. This is the first documented attempt at total genocide against the Jewish people. It was not a war. It was not a conquest. It was a legalized plan of extermination with a date and time. And it was executed by a descendant of Amalek. The same nature, the same intent, the same objective, to completely destroy the people of God. Not for territory, not for resources, not for political power, but for what Israel represented, for the testimony that their existence gave, that God is real, that God acts, that God keeps his promises. And now look at the full pattern. Look at it from above. In Exodus 17, Amalek attacked the weak of Israel in the desert. In 1 Samuel 15, God ordered the total destruction of Amalek, but Saul disobeyed and spared King Agag. 500 years later, a descendant of Agag nearly accomplished what Amalek had attempted from the very beginning, the total destruction of Israel. Saul's partial disobedience produced the greatest existential threat in Jewish history up to that point. If this is hitting you the way it hit me the first time I understood it, do me a favor. Join this community if you have not already, because what comes next is even stronger. And send this video to that person who needs to hear this, because there are millions of believers who have never seen this connection between Saul, Agag, and Haman, and it completely changes the way you understand the justice of God. But God had not forgotten his promise, and this is where the story takes a turn that only the mind of God could design. Because God already had someone positioned inside the Persian Empire. Someone that no one knew was Jewish, someone who had arrived at the most improbable place possible for a Hebrew orphan, the throne of the Queen of Persia, Esther. And there is a detail in the book of Esther that almost no one notices, but that is absolutely crucial for understanding this story. The book of Esther is the only book of the Bible where the name of God does not appear a single time, not once. In the entire book, in 10 complete chapters, the name of God is not mentioned. Why? Because the point of the book of Esther is not to show what God does visibly. It is to show what God does invisibly, behind the circumstances, behind the coincidences, behind what looks like chance, but is not. That Esther was beautiful, coincidence. That the king was looking for a new queen at just that moment, coincidence. That Esther won the king's favor among hundreds of candidates, coincidence. That Mordecai discovered a plot against the king and it was recorded in the royal annals, coincidence. That on the very night before the day planned for the genocide, the king could not sleep and asked to have the royal records read to him, and they just happened to open to the page where Mordecai's act was recorded. Coincidence. Too many coincidences, so many that they stopped being coincidences. And when Mordecai tells Esther that she must go before the king to save her people, He says something in chapter 4, verse 14. That is one of the most profound statements in the Old Testament. Who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Who knows? It is not a statement, it is a question. Because in the book of Esther, God does not give speeches or send prophets or part seas. He works in silence. He positions pieces. He moves circumstances. And he waits for people to be brave when the moment comes to act. Esther risked her life by entering uninvited before the king, an act that could mean death under Persian law. But the king extended the golden scepter to her. He accepted her. And in a carefully prepared banquet, Esther revealed that she was Jewish and that Haman had planned the extermination of her people. And the result was exactly what the Bible calls poetic justice. Esther chapter 7, verse 10. They hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. The gallows that Haman built to kill the Jew was the same gallows where Haman died. The weapon he prepared against Israel was turned against himself. But there is more, much more. Because the book of Esther does not just record Haman's death, it records a total reversal of every element of the plan. Haman wanted the king's ring to seal the decree of death. Esther chapter 8, verse 2. The king took that same ring and gave it to Mordecai. The instrument of power that Haman used to sign the death of the Jews was now in the hands of a Jew. Haman wanted the Jews unable to defend themselves. Esther chapter 8, verses 11 and 12. The king authorized the Jews to defend themselves and destroy anyone who attacked them. The defenseless became the defenders. Haman wanted the 13th of Adar to be the day of Jewish extermination. Esther chapter 9, verse 1. On the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, when the king's command and edict were about to be carried out, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain mastery over them, the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. The same day, the same date. But the result was exactly the opposite. It is the same pattern that repeats again and again in the Bible. Pharaoh ordered the Hebrew babies drowned in the Nile, and Pharaoh's army drowned in the Red Sea. Haman built a gallows for Mordecai, and Haman died on his own gallows. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den by the men who accused him. And those same men ended up in the den. Every weapon formed against the people of God ends up destroying the one who made it. And not just Haman. Esther chapter 9, verses 7 through 10. Haman's 10 sons were also executed. The entire Agagite line. The entire offspring of the enemy that Saul should have eliminated 450 years earlier. What Saul failed to do, God made sure was done. But I want us to see something else, something that happened between Saul and Esther, something that involves David. Because David's story with the Amalekites has lessons that are completely different from Saul's, and they reveal the other side of the coin. 1 Samuel chapter 30. David was living in Ziklag, a city that the Philistine king Achish had given him while he was fleeing from Saul. And while David was away with his men, the Amalekites attacked Ziklag. They burned the city, and they took captive all the women and children, including David's 2 wives. Verse 4. David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. Imagine that. 600 warriors weeping until they physically could not weep anymore. Their families kidnapped, their city in ashes. And to make matters worse, verse 6. David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. His own men wanted to kill him. At the lowest point of his life, surrounded by rubble, without family, without a home, with his own soldiers turning against him. And here comes the difference between David and Saul. The difference that changed everything. Verse 6, second part. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. He did not look for justifications. He did not blame others. He did not negotiate with God. He strengthened himself in God, period. And he inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue this band?" And God said to him, "Pursue, for you shall surely overtake them, and shall surely recover all." David pursued the Amalekites. He overtook them. He defeated them, and he recovered absolutely everything. Verse 19. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken. David recovered all. Everything, every person, every object, every animal, nothing was missing. And notice the contrast. Saul received a direct order from God to destroy Amalek and disobeyed to keep the spoil. David never received the order for total destruction, consulted God before acting, obeyed completely, and recovered everything he had lost. Saul lost the kingdom through his disobedience regarding Amalek. David strengthened his path to the throne through his obedience regarding Amalek. And there is one final episode with Amalek in Saul's life that closes the circle in a way that leaves you speechless. 2 Samuel chapter 1. David has just returned from his victory over the Amalekites at Ziklag, and a messenger arrives, a young man. He comes from the battlefield, where Saul had just fought against the Philistines on Mount Gilboa, and the young man tells David that Saul is dead. David asks how he knows, and the young man says, verses 9 and 10, "Saul said to me, 'Stand beside me and kill me, for anguish has seized me.' So I stood beside him and killed him, because I was sure that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown that was on his head and the armlet that was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my lord." David asks him, "Where are you from?" And the young man answers, verse 13, "I am the son of a foreigner, an Amalekite." An Amalekite. The king who disobeyed God's command to destroy the Amalekites was finished off by an Amalekite. Read that again. Read it 10 times if you need to until the weight of those words fully lands. The king of Israel, who spared the king of Amalek when God told him to destroy him, lost his kingdom, lost the presence of God, was tormented by an evil spirit for years, and in the end, his death was claimed by a member of the very people he should have eliminated. And David, the man who had just defeated the Amalekites and recovered everything they had stolen, receives the news of Saul's death from the mouth of an Amalekite. And what does David do? Verses 14 and 15. David said to the young man, "How is it you were not afraid to put out your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" And David called one of the young men and said, "Go, execute him." David executed the Amalekite who killed Saul, not out of personal revenge. Saul had pursued David for years, trying to kill him. David had every human reason to rejoice at Saul's death, but he did not. He mourned deeply, and he executed the Amalekite because he had touched the Lord's anointed. Notice the complete irony. Saul spared the Amalekite he was supposed to kill. David killed the Amalekite who presented himself before him. Saul disobeyed regarding Amalek and lost everything. David obeyed regarding Amalek and received everything, including the crown of Israel. If the Bible were a novel, you would say the author went too far, that the irony is too perfect to be believable, but it is not a novel, it is real history. And the irony is not literary, it is divine. Now I want to return to the original question, the question we started with, why did God never forgive the Amalekites? And I believe that now, after everything we have seen, we can answer it with a depth that was not possible before. There is one more Hebrew word you need to know, perhaps the most important of all, Timche et Zeker Amalek mitachat Hashemayim. You shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. The word is makar, to blot out, to eliminate. And this word has a history in the Bible that is absolutely revealing. Makar appears for the first time in Genesis chapter 6, verse 7, when God says, "I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land." It is the same word God used before the flood. The same action: blot out, wipe clean, completely eliminate. And it appears again in Exodus chapter 32, verse 33, when Moses intercedes for Israel after the golden calf. And God says, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book." The same verb, machar, blot out from the book, blot out from existence, blot out from memory. When God uses this word for Amalek, it is not a casual threat. It is the same word he used for the world before the flood. It is the same category of judgment, the judgment reserved for when evil has reached a point where no redemption is possible. And here is the theological key to all of this. The deep reason why God never forgave Amalek. God forgave nations that had a human motive for attacking Israel. Egypt wanted slaves. Babylon wanted an empire. Assyria wanted tribute. Philistia wanted territory. These are understandable motives. Wicked, yes. Oppressive, yes. But human. They have a logic, however twisted. Amalek had no human motive. Amalek attacked the weak for pleasure. He attacked those who could not defend themselves. He attacked not to gain something, but to destroy something. And what he wanted to destroy was not simply a people. It was the testimony that God exists. The phrase "did not fear God" does not simply mean he was not afraid of him. In biblical Hebrew, fearing God is the foundation of all morality. Proverbs chapter 1 verse 7, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Proverbs chapter 8 verse 13, "The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil." When the text says that Amalek did not fear God, it is saying that Amalek rejected the very foundation of morality. He was not just a political enemy of Israel. He was an enemy of the moral order of the universe. And there is something more, something that many scholars have noted but that is rarely mentioned in a regular teaching. Hebrew gematria, the system where each letter has a numerical value, assigns the word Amalek a value of 240. Do you know what other Hebrew word has that same numerical value? Safek, which means doubt. Amalek is numerically equivalent to doubt, and that is no coincidence in Hebrew thought. The rabbis interpreted it for centuries as a spiritual principle. Amalek represents doubt. The doubt that God exists, the doubt that God acts, the doubt that there is a moral order in the universe, the doubt that actions have consequences. And that is why the book of Esther connects with Amalek in such a profound way. Haman, the descendant of Amalek, used Purim, lots, dice, chance, to decide the day of the extermination of the Jews. Esther chapter 3 verse 7. The man who represents doubt in God decides the fate of millions by casting lots. Because for Amalek, everything is chance, everything is coincidence. There is no God, there is no design, there is no justice, there are no consequences, and God took those same Purim, those same lots, that same date chosen at random, and turned it into the day of salvation for the Jewish people. Proverbs chapter 16 verse 33, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." Amalek said, "There is no God." God responded, "Watch how I use your own tool to prove to you that I am right here." And now we enter the final layer of the spiral, the deepest layer, the one that connects all of this to the present. 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verses 42 and 43. In the days of Hezekiah, 500 men of the sons of Simeon went to Mount Seir, and they struck down the remnant of the Amalekites that had escaped, and they have lived there to this day. The last Amalekites, eliminated on Mount Seir, in the days of Hezekiah, approximately 700 years before Christ. From then on, Amalek as a nation ceased to exist. God said, "I will blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." And he did, nation by nation, generation by generation, from Moses to Joshua, from Joshua to Samuel, from Samuel to David, from David to Esther, from Esther to Hezekiah. It took centuries, but it was fulfilled. And here is what many rabbis and theologians have taught throughout history, and what I believe is the most important lesson from this entire investigation. Amalek, as a nation, no longer exists. But the spirit of Amalek is still active. What is the spirit of Amalek? It is attacking the weak because they are weak. It is denying that a moral order exists in the universe. It is believing that everything is random, that there are no consequences. That power is the only thing that matters. It is hating without reason. It is destroying without cause. It is targeting the vulnerable for pleasure, not out of necessity. And when you look at the history of the Jewish people after the disappearance of Amalek as a nation, you see exactly that spirit operating through different peoples and different eras. The Romans destroyed the Second Temple in the year 70, hundreds of thousands of Jews massacred. The Crusaders in the Middle Ages slaughtered entire Jewish communities on their way to the Holy Land. The Spanish Inquisition expelled them in 1492. The pogroms in Russia and Eastern Europe for centuries, and the Holocaust, 6 million. The same pattern, the same spirit, attacking the people who testify that God exists, trying to wipe them from the face of the earth, using the same rhetoric. They are different, they have their own laws, they do not benefit us. It is better that they not exist. Haman's words repeated through different mouths for 3 millennia, and in every case, without exception, the result has been the same. Israel survives. The attacker faces consequences. Pharaoh drowned. Haman was hanged. Rome fell. The Crusaders lost their kingdoms in less than 2 centuries. Spain lost its world dominance shortly after the expulsion. Nazi Germany was reduced to rubble. Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. The promise God made to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. That promise is 4,000 years old, and it has not failed a single time. So why did God never forgive the Amalekites? It was not out of cruelty. It was not on a whim. It was not because God plays favorites. It was because Amalek represented something that admits no forgiveness, gratuitous evil against the defenseless, combined with the absolute rejection of the existence of a God who sees, who judges, and who acts. God forgave every nation that at some point showed even a glimmer of recognition of the divine. Egypt acknowledged God's power through the plagues. Babylon acknowledged God through Daniel. Nineveh repented at the preaching of Jonah. Even the Philistines acknowledged the power of the ark and returned it. Amalek never acknowledged anything. He never repented. He never showed a glimmer of reverential awe. He never stopped. He attacked generation after generation after generation with the same objective, to destroy the people of God, not for what they had, but for what they represented. And that is the difference between an enemy and Amalek. An enemy wants something you have. Amalek wants you to cease to exist. And God, in his justice, said, "If you want to blot out my people from the earth, I will blot you out from under heaven." But there is one last thing I need to tell you, and it is perhaps the most important thing of everything we have said today. The story of Amalek is not just a story of the past, it is a mirror for the present. And I am not just talking about external enemies. I am talking about something much more personal. Every time you doubt that God is acting in your life, that is the spirit of Amalek. Every time the voice in your head says, "It is all coincidence, there is no plan, God is not there." That is Amalek. The rabbis of the Baal Shem Tov taught that the battle against Amalek is not just a historical battle, it is a daily spiritual battle. The battle against doubt, the battle against cynicism, the battle against the belief that the universe is random and that nothing has meaning. Remember Haman casting lots to choose the date of the Jews' destruction. That is exactly what doubt does. It tells you that everything is random, that your life has no purpose, that circumstances are arbitrary, that coincidences are just coincidences. And what the story of Esther demonstrates is that there are no coincidences, that behind every seemingly random circumstance, there is a God who positions pieces, who moves hearts, who opens doors, and who turns the enemy's weapons into instruments of salvation. Haman's gallows became Haman's gallows. The lots he cast to destroy became the date of celebration. What seemed like the end became the beginning of something new, and that is exactly what God can do with every situation in your life that seems chaotic, that seems meaningless, that seems abandoned by God. He has not abandoned you. He is working in silence, positioning pieces, preparing the reversal, just as he did with Esther, just as he did with David at Ziklag. Just as he has done with his people for 4,000 years. God blotted out the memory of Amalek from under heaven, but the people Amalek fought against are still here. Israel exists today. The Jewish people exist today. After Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Greece, Rome, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the pogroms, and the Holocaust, they are still here. And if God could preserve a people for 4,000 years against every enemy and against all odds, he can preserve you in the midst of whatever you are facing. The question is not whether God is acting. The question is whether you are going to trust that he is acting, even when you cannot see it. If this video changed your perspective on something you had never understood before, I want to ask you to do something. There is another video I prepared especially for you that will go even deeper into what we just saw. It is appearing on your screen right now. Click on it. Do not miss it.